You're watching Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. It has now been, what we do see, and I will mention this, by the way. We've been watching this live vantage point of Gaza for the past 48 hours. You at home might have noticed this, like we have, that there is this bright light shining in the middle of the picture, and we have not been able to distinguish what exactly that is. It does appear that it's something separate from any of the blasts that we've seen in recent days. So unclear if there could be some sort of controlled burn or some other large light that might be out in the distance there. We acknowledge it, and we do see it ourselves. We simply don't know what it is. The Gaza war, of course, has been dominating the headlines the past couple of days. And today, we are now learning that Israel is sending about 200 troops, the United States is sending about 200 troops to Israel to help support and monitor the ceasefire deal in Gaza as part of a team that includes partner nations, non-governmental organizations, and private sector players. Hal Kempfer is still standing by with me here. Hal, the deployment of 200 troops to Israel, do we have any specifics about what they're going to be doing?
Yeah, they're going to be setting up what's called a civil military coordination center. And that's something I've actually trained on behalf of our government. I've trained other countries on how to do things like that, setting up civil military operations centers, civil military coordination centers. It is something you do when you're doing a civil military operation. In other words, you have civilian agencies. In some cases, you have non-governmental organizations like the Red Cross and other things that will be in there. And then you have military. And in this case, you might have multiple militaries. You could have militaries from across the Middle East. You could have Pakistan, Indonesia. Sounds like the French may send some forces in there. So that's something that we do very well. That's something we probably do better than anybody else in the world. We have done it many times in many theaters that we do the civil military coordination piece. And we have, I think, some of the best skills, doctrine in terms of making this happen. So those 200 troops, even though broadly speaking, they're helping to monitor the peacekeeping and doing all these other things, what they're really doing is they're working a center that's going to help get aid into the Palestinians that need all that aid. It's going to help, moving forces that got to go in there to do peacekeeping operations. I imagine at some point it'll probably even help with setting up this new transitional government that they're going to have set up after Hamas moves aside. Hopefully Hamas moves aside. Anyway, they're going to be busy. I don't know if it's going to be actually physically located in Gaza or adjacent to Gaza. This is all brand new. It just came out. And frankly, it surprised a lot of people that we're actually putting boots on the ground. It's just not entirely clear which ground those boots will be on, but they will be there working the Gaza issue.
A live look at the White House. The time is 8:38 in the nation's capital. The Gaza war has been dominating the headlines, as I said, but the Russia-Ukraine war has not gone anywhere. Politico has the following reporting. They say Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is saying that he'll nominate President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize if he sends Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine and then helps broker a ceasefire with Russia. When asked about the potential of getting Tomahawks from the U.S., Zelensky was recently quoted as saying, quote, "During our most recent meeting, I didn't hear a no. What I did hear was that work will continue at the technical level and that this possibility will be considered," unquote. So Hal, why are Tomahawks so important to Ukraine? Are Tomahawks necessary for defensive purposes, offensive purposes? What do they want to use these things for?
Well, in all candor, as you know, I've always been a fan of Tomahawk missiles ever since they told me that was on the list of things that I can employ if I need to. They're rather expensive, but they have tremendous range. They can cover certainly all of European Russia. They could shoot all the way into more of what I would call the far east side of Russia on the other side of the Urals. Now, the Ukrainians are actually building something similar to that. It's called the Flamingo missile. It's not quite certainly not as sophisticated as a Tomahawk. But what I'm hearing is that President Trump says he's kind of made a decision on the Tomahawk missiles. And I have seen where we may have about 200 missiles that we could send. Why would they want them? Because they can do some deep strike stuff, and they come in with a really heavy warhead. If you remember the strikes that took place in Iran, yes, the B-2 bombers got a lot of attention, but that was one target. But the other two targets were actually hit with submarine launched Tomahawk missiles, and they were extremely capable. We've had these things for well over 3 decades, going into almost 4 decades. Very, very accurate. Of course, that 1,000 kilogram warhead that can cause massive devastation, and it's a cruise missile, flies low, very difficult to intercept. And if they could do, if Ukraine had those missiles, that could really change a lot of things. Those are missiles that could be aimed at oil refineries, gas refining capabilities, or processing plants. It can be aimed at those places that create rocket fuel, for example, for those ballistic missiles. It can be aimed at places where they build drones. There's just a lot of different things. And yes, potentially they could use it to attack Moscow. That's been brought up over and over again. I don't think they need to use the Tomahawks to attack Moscow. And of course, Putin has been saber rattling like crazy, mentioning nuclear war, mentioning all sorts of stuff. I should say Putin's, the henchmen surrounding him have been saying all these things. They're very nervous about this. Right now, Ukraine has been very successful going after the oil refineries. There are long gas lines in Moscow, St. Petersburg. Gas is selling over $9 a gallon if you can find it, if you finally get there. And this is causing great internal political stress in these metropolitan areas of Russia.
We've been talking endlessly, and we talked for over an hour, you and I, yesterday about the Gaza peace deal. This was a Trump-branded peace deal. Who could be that figure, and who is on the short list of figures or states that could put together a similar deal that might lead us on a path to peace in the Russia-Ukraine fight?
Well, I think it's going to go back to the same place. President Trump has just started saying, once literally the ink had not dried on these documents, and already the White House was talking about trying to reinvigorate the ceasefire or peace process in the Ukraine-Russia war. And so I think he's going to make another attempt at it. And of course, President Zelensky I got to tell you, he has become much, after that thing that happened in February in the White House, in the Oval Office, he has become very adept at his choice of language. And so he was saying, look, I will nominate President Trump to get a Nobel Peace Prize if he'll send us Tomahawk missiles. And he realizes the Tomahawk missiles could be, dare I use an overworked term, game changer in terms of what's happening there, and hitting those places that could really have an impact, not just on their supply chain and their infrastructure, but really have a psychological impact on the Russian people, and do those things that would truly weaken the Putin regime to the point that he might say, hey, look, this is getting too dangerous. I can't keep doing this war. I need to stop it because I'm going to have another 1991 moment here if I don't do something. So, yes, he's pushing for that hard. And at the same time, I should also mention those other missiles that they produce called the Flamingo missiles, very similar to the Tomahawk and many capabilities. Those things are ramping up production. I think they're going to be producing a little less than, last month they're producing about 1 missile a day. I think they're producing a little less than 10 missiles a day now. They're expected to go to full production in February. I've never heard how many missiles per day that is, but it's a lot more than what they're producing now. And that's one where you could see a tremendous amount of destruction across Russia, deep inside Russia, hitting those places where everybody thinks they're safe, and then all of a sudden everything becomes chaos and blows up. And that's the sort of thing that causes great angst in the Russian psyche.
Let's talk about, and we've been ping-ponging back and forth from region to region here. I got to head back to the Middle East because Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt recently sent this out. She's responding to the reports of 200 U.S. troops being sent to Israel to help support and monitor the deal in Gaza. She says this is not true and taken out of context. She says, to be clear, up to 200 U.S. personnel who are already stationed at CENTCOM will be tasked with monitoring the peace agreement in Israel, and they will work with other international forces on the ground. With her clarification in mind, does that change anything about how you think about the situation?
Actually, I just see it as a clarification. That's kind of what we just said, actually. There was a lot of running with this saying, oh, we're going to put 200 troops. And I heard this from a number of outlets saying, we're going to put 200 troops on the ground, or we're going to put 200 troops in there monitoring the peacekeeping process and stuff. And it's not exactly that. If they're running a CMCC, which could be on Israeli territory, it could be using CENTCOM troops that are already in U.S. Central Command troops are already in the Middle East. Could be simply moving them around and moving up to that. And a lot of this could be done where they don't actually have to be physically located right there next to the border of Gaza. You know, some of it could be more remote, that they provide support at other locations, perhaps at airfields and other things like that, where they provide some, greater legs, if you will, in terms of what comes in. So there's a lot of ways this can be set up. So I think she was just trying to clarify that, no, we're not putting combat troops on the ground in Gaza doing peacekeeping missions. And I did hear some language earlier in the day when this first popped up. And by the way, it's only been out for a few hours. But when this first popped up, there was a kind of I thought some people were kind of jumping to conclusions and making it sound like 200 troops will be out there, doing this lost patrol thing somewhere in Gaza. And that's just not the case. So I think her clarification is actually, it's appropriate for what she's trying to say. Doesn't really say what exactly they're doing, but she's just trying to clarify they're not going to be actually physically with weapons patrolling the Gaza Strip, which I think some people are worried about.
Yeah. Hal Kemper is a retired Marine intelligence officer, national security analyst, and the host of the Strat podcast. You can listen to Strat anywhere podcasts are available. Good to see you.
All right. Great to see you, Austin.
Thanks. All right. The time is just